I gave my son and daughter-in-law the home I shared with their father, hoping it would ease their burdens. But when I returned from a trip, my bags were on the cold sidewalk with a note from her. If you want to stay here, we have the garage. What they didn't know was that I was still secretly paying their mortgage, and that phone call to the bank was about to change everything. Don't forget to subscribe while you're listening, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Now, take a breath and listen closely. This is my story. The rain felt like tears I hadn't shed yet, washing over my bags neatly lined up on the cold sidewalk. After a week visiting my sister Beatrice in Portland, all I wanted was my cozy armchair and a hot cup of chamomile tea. Instead, I stood locked out of my own home, the place Arthur and I built, the heart of our life with Daniel. Dark clouds gathered overhead, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. Clara's sharp, slanted handwriting, always in a hurry, was unmistakable. If you want to stay here, we have the garage. Your loving daughter-in-law. My hands trembled as I reread the words. 35 years. This house. Every brick, every tree, every wall bore Arthur's touch, our shared memories. Daniel had taken his first steps here, scraped knees on the patio, learned to drive in this very driveway. After Arthur passed 2 years ago, I'd legally signed the house over to Daniel and Clara. A gesture of love, a way to help them, I'd thought. Yet I was the one still secretly making the mortgage payments every month. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with rain. Before the taxi even pulled away, I dialed the bank, needing to confirm the absurd reality. Mrs. Vance? The customer service representative's voice sounded too cheerful for the sudden chill in the air. Yes, we show your automatic payment of $1,167 went through last Friday as scheduled. Thank you, I whispered, ending the call. A heavy drop splashed onto my forehead. 68 years old, standing in a growing puddle, staring at the scattered remnants of my life. The sky truly opened up then, as if giving me permission to finally break down. I should have seen this coming. The quick, knowing glances Daniel and Clara exchanged when I mentioned redecorating my kitchen. The not-so-subtle comments about senior communities, how I wouldn't have to worry about yard work anymore, the way they'd rearranged the living room during my Christmas visit to Beatrice, moving my favorite reading chair to the dim basement. Small things, so small. Yet now they felt like daggers, twisted precisely into the spots where I had loved them most. The garage door was unlocked. Inside, a narrow twin mattress lay against one wall, a small nightstand and lamp casting a weak yellow glow. My clothes, neatly folded, hung on a portable rack. My books, framed photos of Arthur and Daniel, treasured keepsakes, all stacked in cardboard boxes, each labelled Mom's Stuff in Clara's hasty script. I sank onto the thin mattress. The concrete floor was cold through my shoes. Through the small, grimy window, I could see the familiar glow of the living room, the house where I'd given everything, only to find myself relegated to an afterthought. My phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Mum, we need the space. Clara has been asking for a home office for months. The garage apartment has everything you need. Don't make this difficult. Don't make this difficult. As if I were the problem, as if my very existence was an inconvenience. I'd never been one to cry easily. Arthur used to tease me about my stoic nature. But the tears came then, silent and hot, tracing paths down my cheeks. I thought of those sleepless nights by Daniel's side, his asthma attacks. The second job I'd taken to pay for his college when Arthur's business faltered. The weekends watching Lily and Leo so Daniel and Clara could have their couple time. All those sacrifices, reduced to this, a burden. An old woman to be tucked away, out of sight. I didn't respond to Daniel's text. Instead, I called Beatrice. Eleanor, what's wrong? She asked, her voice sharp with immediate concern. My friend knew me too well. I need a place to stay. I managed, the words catching in my throat like shards of broken glass. They've put me in the garage. Beatrice didn't ask for explanations. No questions, no damn judgment. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. As I waited, sitting on that thin mattress, surrounded by the boxed-up remnants of my life, a decision solidified within me. This house had been my heart for 35 years. I'd poured everything into it, my love, my savings, my dreams. And now, they thought they could simply push me aside, like an old piece of furniture. The garage door rattled as the rain intensified outside, a drumbeat against the quiet fury building inside me. I looked at my trembling hands and slowly, deliberately, curled them into fists. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I wasn't just Daniel's mother or Arthur's widow. I was Eleanor Vance, and I was done being invisible. What would you have done in my place, watching everything you built crumble with a single cold note? Beatrice's spare bedroom wasn't much, but it had a door that locked and windows that actually let in sunlight. After 3 days at the Sunset Motel, a name that felt eerily appropriate for this chapter of my life, I was damn grateful to be somewhere that didn't charge by the night. The rain had finally softened to a persistent drizzle, a fitting backdrop to my shattered world. "You can stay as long as you need," Beatrice insisted, setting a steaming mug of coffee in front of me. Her face, usually etched with a gentle worry, was now firm with resolve. "Charles and I rattle around in this house like 2 peas in a barrel since the kids moved out." Her husband, Charles, had just nodded, his kind eyes offering silent support. I wrapped my trembling hands around the warm mug, the steam a small comfort. "I appreciate it, Bea, truly. But this can't be permanent. I need to figure out what to do about the house." "You mean your house?" Beatrice corrected, her eyes narrowing. "The one you're still making payments on." Beatrice had been my friend for over 30 years. She'd known Arthur, had watched Daniel grow up, had been there through every joy and sorrow. And unlike my own son, she remembered who I was before I became invisible. "I keep thinking about when it all started to change," I said, staring into my coffee, the surface rippling with the subtle tremor in my hands. After Arthur passed, I thought giving Daniel and Clara the house would help them. They'd just had Lily. Money was tight. I wanted to ease their burden. "And they took advantage," Beatrice finished, her voice flat. The memories surfaced like bruises I'd been avoiding pressing on. 6 months after Arthur's funeral, Clara had started rearranging the house, claiming it needed updating, she'd said. My suggestions were dismissed with a dismissive wave. My belongings migrated from the living room to closets, then to the basement, then finally to those cold storage bins. "You know what Clara said when I objected to her throwing out Arthur's fishing gear?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We need to move forward, Eleanor, not live in a museum." As if my husband's memory was just clutter to be cleared away. Beatrice reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What about Daniel? Surely he stood up for you." I laughed, a hollow sound that surprised even me. "Daniel said I was being difficult, that I needed to adapt to the new normal." His new normal apparently meant forgetting his father and sidelining his mother. The control had been so gradual, I barely noticed it happening. First, they took over the kitchen, criticizing my cooking. Then came complaints about my TV shows being too loud, my friends visiting too often, my gardening taking up too much of their yard. Each surrender on my part only emboldened them further. "The worst part is, I enabled it all," I admitted, the truth a bitter taste. "I kept paying the mortgage because I was afraid they'd struggle financially. I wanted to help them, to be useful, to be loved. You were buying your place in that house, in your own son's life," Beatrice said softly, the truth of her words stinging. "One mortgage payment at a time." My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Mum, when are you coming to get the rest of your things? We need to convert the garage for Lily's playroom." I showed Beatrice the message, my hand trembling slightly. "That ungrateful little—" She bit off the word. "Eleanor, there's something you should know. I didn't want to tell you because I knew it would hurt, but you deserve the truth." My stomach tightened, a knot of dread. "What is it?" Last month at book club, Clara was there. She'd had a few glasses of wine and started talking about their plans. They're putting the house on the market, Eleanor. They want to buy that new construction in Oakwood Hills. The room seemed to tilt sideways. They're selling my house. They think it's their house, Beatrice said gently. And technically, legally it is. But morally, that's another story. I thought of the 35 years of memories embedded in those walls. Arthur and I bringing baby Daniel home. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. The garden Arthur had built for our 20th anniversary. My husband's last breaths in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we'd created together. And they were going to sell it all to strangers, without a second thought. What am I going to do? I whispered, feeling the familiar helplessness creeping back. Beatrice's eyes hardened with a resolve that felt like steel. First, you're going to stop paying their mortgage. Let's see how quickly their plans change when the bank starts calling. But what about my credit? The ingrained habits of a lifetime of responsibility tried to hold me back. Second, she continued, unswayed, you're going to talk to my nephew, Paul. He's a lawyer who specializes in elder rights. There has to be some legal recourse here. I'm not elderly, I protested weakly. Beatrice arched an eyebrow. You're old enough to be treated with respect, which is not what's happening here. She was right. For 2 years, I'd been shrinking myself, becoming smaller and quieter to avoid being a burden. And where had it gotten me? Evicted from my own home, my belongings packed in boxes, my existence reduced to an inconvenience. As the reality of my situation crystallized, something else emerged from beneath the hurt and betrayal. A slow, controlled anger, one that felt almost foreign after years of accommodation. Okay, I said, straightening my shoulders. Let's talk to Paul. Beatrice squeezed my hand. That's my girl. And Eleanor, remember who you are. You're not just Daniel's mother or Arthur's widow. You're Eleanor Vance. And it's about time everyone remembered that. For the first time since finding my suitcases on the sidewalk, I felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Or maybe it was sheer, unadulterated determination. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going down without a fight. But how does one even begin to fight against the very people you once loved and protected with all your heart? Paul, Beatrice's nephew, was not what I expected. With his faded jeans and a casual Henley shirt, he looked more like a college professor than a lawyer. But his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing as he reviewed the mortgage statements I'd brought. Beatrice sat beside me, her presence a silent fortress. So, you've been making payments on a house that's no longer in your name, Paul said, a slight frown creasing his brow. And your son and daughter-in-law have been living there rent-free while planning to sell it. Put so bluntly, it sounded absurd, even to me. Yes, I confirmed, my voice thin. And they evicted me to the garage. Embarrassment warmed my cheeks. How had I allowed things to reach this point? You have options, Paul stated, leaning back. The financial arrangements could constitute a verbal contract. At minimum, you could sue for recovery of the mortgage payments you've made since the property transfer. There's also the possibility of placing a lien. Beatrice, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, spoke up. She needs to confront them first, make them understand what they've done. Paul looked skeptical, but I knew Beatrice was right. Before taking legal action against my own son, I needed to give him one last chance to make things right. It was a desperate hope, a tiny flicker that perhaps, just perhaps, the boy I raised still existed beneath the layers of entitlement. That's how I found myself standing on the porch of my own home the next day, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I'd lived here since before Daniel was born. Yet here I was, a visitor, requiring permission to enter. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Clara answered, her surprise quickly masked by a tight, artificial smile. Eleanor, we weren't expecting you. I need to speak with you and Daniel, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She hesitated, then stepped aside. Of course, come in. The living room had changed again since I'd left. My favorite reading lamp was gone, replaced by a modern, stark floor lamp I didn't recognize. The family photos I'd arranged on the mantel had been rearranged, several of Arthur now conspicuously missing. Daniel emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Mum, what are you doing here?" "I came to talk about the house," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "Beatrice told me you're planning to sell it." Their exchanged glance, quick and guilty, confirmed everything. The air in the once familiar room suddenly crackled with a cold, undeniable tension. What would you have felt, seeing the truth of their betrayal laid bare in that shared glance, standing in the home that was once truly yours? "We were going to tell you," Daniel said, not quite meeting my eyes, his voice laced with a subtle defensiveness. Once everything was finalized, his gaze flickered towards Clara, who offered a tight, reassuring smile. A performance for the woman they thought they still controlled. Finalized? My voice, though quiet, felt sharp in the freshly painted, impersonal living room. This was my home for 35 years. Your father and I built this house, Daniel. We raised you here. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of decades. A stark contrast to the modern, hollow decor that now filled the space. The absence of Arthur's photos on the mantel felt like a physical blow, a deliberate erasure of history. Clara sighed dramatically, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing the edge of an unfamiliar throw pillow. "Eleanor, we understand you have sentimental attachments, but we need to do what's best for our family now." Her tone was saccharine, but her eyes held a dismissive edge. "Your family?" I repeated, the question tasting like ash. "And what am I?" An uncomfortable silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Daniel shifted his weight, avoiding my gaze, his discomfort palpable, yet overshadowed by an unyielding resolve. "Mom," he finally said, his tone dripping with a patronizing patience that made my skin crawl. "You signed the house over to us. We appreciate everything you've done, truly. But it's our property now. We get to decide what happens to it." He sounded like a lawyer, not my son, like a robot reciting legal code, not a man speaking to his mother. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The rain outside had eased, replaced by the persistent drip from the eaves, each drop a tiny hammer against my raw nerves. "I've been paying the mortgage for the past 2 years," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Every month, from my account, to keep a roof over your heads." Another glance, swift and conspiratorial, passed between them. They'd known. Of course they'd known. How could they not? "That was your choice, Eleanor," Clara said coolly, her chin lifting defiantly. "We never asked you to do that." Her words, so casual, struck me like a physical blow. My choice? It was my life's blood, my endless giving. My hands began to tremble, visibly now. "I did it to help you," I choked out, the pain of their ingratitude a searing fire in my chest. "Because that's what family does. And we're grateful," Daniel interjected quickly, though his tone suggested anything but genuine gratitude. It was a practiced phrase, devoid of warmth. "But that doesn't change the legal situation, Mum. The house is ours, so my 35 years here," I pressed, my voice rising slightly. "My financial support, my role in this family, none of that matters?" I searched Daniel's face, desperate for a flicker of recognition, a hint of the boy who once clung to my hand. But he merely shrugged, looking uncomfortable yet unmoved. "Mom, you're making this more dramatic than it needs to be," he said, the patronizing note back in full force. "We can help you find a nice senior apartment." "I don't need a nice senior apartment," I snapped, the anger finally breaking through. "I need my son to show an ounce of decency and respect." Clara stepped forward, her smile tight, a mask of false concern. "Eleanor, I think you're getting emotional. Perhaps we should continue this conversation another time." That's when I knew, truly knew. There was no fixing this. The son I'd raised, The boy I'd loved with every fibre of my being was gone. In his place stood a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obligation, a problem to be managed. The realization settled over me, cold and heavy, but it also ignited a surprising, fierce resolve. "I've stopped the automatic mortgage payments," I said quietly, each word a stone falling into a deep well. Daniel's expression changed instantly. The calm facade shattered, replaced by raw shock. "You what?" His voice was a strangled gasp. "If you want to sell my home, you'll need to pay for it yourselves." My voice gained strength with each word. "You can't do that!" Clara's voice rose, a shrill, panicked shriek. "What about our credit? We have plans." "Yes," I agreed, a bitter smile touching my lips. "I hear Oakwood Hills is lovely this time of year." Daniel's face darkened, a dangerous flush creeping up his neck. "Mum, the house was Dad's gift to me. You know that. It was never really yours." The words hit me like a physical blow. Never really yours. 35 years of my life, dismissed in 5 cruel words. My vision blurred for a moment. "I see," I said, my voice barely audible now, all emotion drained from it. "Well then, I suppose there's nothing left to discuss." I turned to leave, my legs unsteady beneath me. As I reached the door, I paused, looking back at the son who no longer saw me, at the daughter-in-law who had orchestrated my banishment. "Your father would be ashamed of you, Daniel," I said, the words heavy with finality. And for the first time, so am I. I walked out, closing the door softly behind me. The spring air felt cool against my hot cheeks as I made my way down the driveway, away from the home that had never truly been mine. Something had irrevocably broken inside me today, but something else, something stronger and undeniably sharper, had been forged in its place. How does one truly begin to rebuild when the very foundation of your life has been deliberately shattered by those you loved most? "You did what?" Beatrice's coffee mug was suspended halfway to her lips, her eyes wide. We were back in her kitchen, the familiar warmth a stark contrast to the cold confrontation I'd just left. "I stopped the payments," I repeated, still shocked by my own boldness, the words feeling foreign, yet undeniably right on my tongue. "I told them if they want to sell the house, they'll need to pay for it themselves." Beatrice set her mug down with a definitive thunk that echoed in the quiet room. "Well, it's about damn time." Paul, who had insisted on joining us after my confrontation, looked less enthusiastic. He sat across from me, tapping a pen against his legal pad. "It's a good first step, Eleanor, but we need to protect you legally. If your name isn't on the title anymore, you could be liable for the missed payments without any claim to the property." The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving room for doubt to creep in. "Have I made a terrible mistake?" I whispered, the weight of the situation suddenly pressing down on me. "No," Beatrice said firmly, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze mine. "You've finally stood up for yourself." Paul nodded, his gaze serious. "Let's be strategic about this. I'm going to contact the bank tomorrow, explain the situation, and see what options we have. In the meantime, you need to gather every shred of evidence that shows you've been making these payments." I nodded, thinking of the meticulous financial records Arthur had taught me to keep. At least I had that. "What about my things still at the house?" I asked, a fresh wave of anxiety washing over me. The thought of my treasured possessions, still trapped in that garage, made my stomach clench. Beatrice squared her shoulders, a glint in her eye. "I'll go with you to collect them. If they give us any trouble, I still remember how to swing the softball bat from our community league days." Despite everything, I found myself laughing, a genuine, joyful sound that felt alien in this moment. Beatrice had always been fiercely protective, even back in high school when she'd confronted the girls who'd made fun of my second-hand clothes. "I don't know what I'd do without you both," I said, my voice catching. Paul reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone in this, Eleanor. We'll make sure they don't take advantage of you anymore." The next morning, A call came from First Federal Bank. My heart pounded as I answered, expecting questions about the missed mortgage payment. Mrs. Vance? This is Trevor Phillips from the mortgage department. We've received a request to discuss the situation with your property on Maple Avenue. I gripped the phone tighter. Yes, that's correct. I understand you've been making payments on a property that's no longer in your name. Our records show consistent payments from your account for the past 26 months. Yes, I confirmed. But I've decided to stop those payments. There was a pause. Then Trevor's voice, lower now, more personal. Mrs. Vance, I don't normally do this, but would you be willing to come into the branch to discuss this further? I think there might be options you haven't considered. 2 hours later, I sat across from Trevor, a kind-faced man about Daniel's age. He explained something called an equitable lien. Essentially, by consistently paying the mortgage on a property from which I derived no benefit, I might have established an interest in the property, even without being on the title. Hope fluttered in my chest, a fragile new sensation. What does that mean exactly? It means you could potentially place a lien on the property for the amount you've contributed, Trevor explained. They wouldn't be able to sell without addressing that lien. For the first time since finding my suitcases on the sidewalk, I felt a glimmer of control returning. A chess piece moved on a board I thought I'd lost. There's something else, Trevor said, lowering his voice slightly. Your son called this morning. Quite upset about the missed payment. He seemed unaware of how mortgages work. I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always relied on others to handle the practical aspects of life. First Arthur and me, now Clara, and apparently my monthly payments. What did you tell him? That missed payments affect credit scores and could eventually lead to foreclosure proceedings, Trevor said. He didn't take it well. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Mum, we need to talk about the mortgage ASAP. I showed Trevor the message. What would you like to do, Mrs. Vance? He asked. It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me that in years. What did I want? Not just regarding the house, but with my life. I thought of the confrontation with Daniel and Clara, their casual dismissal of my contributions, their assumption that I would continue to finance their dreams while being relegated to the garage. I want what's rightfully mine, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Trevor nodded, respect evident in his expression. Then let's make that happen. That afternoon, armed with information from Trevor and legal advice from Paul, I took another unexpected step in my new life. I applied for a job. The help wanted sign in the window of Rosie's cafe had caught my eye as I walked back to Beatrice's house. You want to wait tables? Beatrice asked, eyebrows raised when I told her. I was a waitress all through college, I reminded her, and I need my own income, my own life. I can't just hide out in your spare room forever. Beatrice considered this. Well, Rosie's does have the best pie in town. 2 days later, I had my first shift. My feet ached, and my back screamed by the end of it, but the tips in my pocket were mine, earned by my own hands. The simple satisfaction of that was something I hadn't felt in years. When I returned to Beatrice's, exhausted but oddly invigorated, there were 6 missed calls from Daniel on my phone. I listened to the first voicemail. Mom, the bank called about the mortgage. They mentioned something about a lien. What are you doing? Call me back immediately. I deleted it without listening to the others. For once, Daniel would have to wait for my convenience, not the other way around. Beatrice brought me a glass of wine and sat beside me on the porch swing. How does it feel? She asked softly. I considered the question, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It feels like I'm finally waking up, I said. Like I've been sleepwalking since Arthur died. And now you're Eleanor again, Beatrice finished for me. I nodded, raising my glass in a small toast. To Eleanor Vance. It was nice to finally meet her, but would this new version of myself be strong enough to face the inevitable confrontation still looming ahead? 3 weeks into working at Rosie's cafe, I'd settled into a rhythm that felt surprisingly comfortable. My tips were modest, but steady, and the physical work kept my mind occupied. More importantly, I had a purpose again. Somewhere to be. People who relied on me. A life entirely my own. That's why the sight of Daniel, standing awkwardly by the hostess stand, sent a jolt through me. "Mum?" he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "Can we talk?" Rosa, the owner, caught my eye from behind the counter. "Take 15 if you need it, Eleanor." I nodded and led Daniel to a corner booth, away from my regular customers, who had become something like friends. "You look different," he said, studying me. I smoothed down my apron. "I am different." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, about the house." "I'm not discussing that here," I interrupted, my voice firm. "If that's why you came, you're wasting your time." "Please," he said, a note of desperation creeping in. "Clara and we're in trouble. The bank called about a lien, and our credit score is dropping because of the missed payments." I observed my son, his expensive watch, his carefully styled hair, the subtle scent of cologne that probably cost more than I made in a day at Rosie's. Everything about him screamed entitlement. A life cushioned by other sacrifices. "What do you want from me, Daniel?" He leaned forward. "We need you to lift the lien and resume the payments. Just until we can sell the house." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. "And what do I get in return?" "We'll make sure you're taken care of," he said, as if offering a great kindness. "There's a really nice senior community in Westbrook." "Stop," I said, raising my hand. "I'm not interested in being taken care of. I've been taking care of myself, and you, for years." "Mom, be reasonable. You can't keep working here." He gestured around the cafe dismissively. "You're almost 70. 68, I corrected. "And I'm doing just fine." Daniel's face hardened slightly, his mask of contrition slipping. "Fine. What do you want? A percentage of the sale?" I studied him. This stranger wearing my son's face. "I want my home back." He blinked, then laughed nervously. "That's not possible. We've already made an offer on the house in Oakwood Hills. Not my problem." Daniel's expression darkened. "It is your problem if you want a relationship with your granddaughter. With any of us." The threat hung in the air, ugly and explicit. My own son was using my love for Lily as leverage. "Are you threatening to keep Lily from me?" He had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but pressed on. "I'm just saying that families need to support each other. Clara and I have a plan for our future, and you're standing in the way. The way I stood in the way when I paid your college tuition? Or when I watched Lily and Leo every weekend so you and Clara could have couple time? Or when I signed over the house and kept making payments so you could save for that boat you bought last summer?" Daniel flushed. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It's not." My break was almost over. I slid out of the booth and stood, straightening my apron. "I need to get back to work." "Mom, please." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "We need this. The house in Oakwood Hills is perfect. We can't lose it." For a moment, I saw the little boy who used to climb into my lap with scraped knees, looking to me to make everything better. But that boy was gone. In his place sat a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But I need something in writing from you and Clara first. Meet me at Paul Weston's office tomorrow at 2 p.m. Relief washed over Daniel's face. "Thank you, Mom. You won't regret this." As he left, I wondered if I already did. When faced with such a cold calculation, does it inevitably turn you into the very thing you despise? I arrived at Paul's office early the next day, my stomach tied in knots. I'd barely slept, going over and over the decision I'd reached in the middle of the night. A fragile truce had settled over my spirit, bought by the quiet resolve to protect myself. The waiting room was hushed, the carpet thick, muffling the distant city sounds. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to echo the frantic beat of my heart. Daniel and Clara arrived precisely at 2 p.m., both dressed as if for a high-stakes business meeting. Clara's smile was tight, a practiced performance, but a flicker of triumph danced in her eyes. as they took seats across from Paul's polished mahogany desk. She glanced at me, then away, as if my presence was merely a formality before their inevitable victory. "Thank you for coming," Paul began formally, his voice calm and professional. "Mrs. Vance has considered your request regarding the property on Maple Avenue." "We appreciate that," Clara interjected smoothly, leaning forward, her voice dripping with artificial confidence. "We're certain we can reach an agreement that benefits everyone." Her eyes darted to Daniel, who offered a quick, reassuring nod. They still believed they held all the cards. Paul slid a single document across the desk, pushing it gently towards Daniel. "This is what Mrs. Vance proposes?" Daniel picked it up, his expression shifting from hopeful anticipation to confused disbelief, then to raw, explosive anger in seconds. His face reddened. "What is this?" he demanded, slamming the paper onto the table. "That," I said calmly, my voice steady, surprising even myself, "is my condition for lifting the lien." Clara snatched the paper from Daniel's hands, her eyes scanning the contents, her perfectly made-up face contorted. "This is ridiculous. You want us to sell you the house for the remaining mortgage balance? It's worth at least 3 times that." Her voice rose, shrill and indignant. "It's worth exactly what I've put into it," I replied, meeting her furious gaze. 35 years of payments, repairs, improvements. Daniel's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson. "You can't do this. The house is legally ours." He pounded his fist lightly on the desk. "With a lien against it," Paul pointed out, his tone even, unyielding. "Which significantly complicates any potential sale and affects your credit, Mr. Vance." "We'll fight this!" Clara shrieked, her voice cold with barely contained fury. "We'll get our own lawyer." I nodded, having expected this reaction. "You can try, but the legal proceedings will take time, months, maybe years. Your credit scores will continue to suffer, and that dream house in Oakwood Hills will go to someone else." The truth of this sank in visibly. Daniel and Clara had overextended themselves, counting on a quick sale of my house to finance their upgrade. The air went out of their sails, deflating them right before my eyes. "You planned this all along," Daniel accused, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes narrowed, filled with a new, dark suspicion. "From the moment we moved you to the garage." "No," I said quietly, the pain of his accusation a dull ache in my chest. I just finally stopped allowing myself to be used. Clara stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly across the floor. "We need to discuss this privately." As they stepped out, Paul gave me an approving nod, a silent affirmation. "You're doing the right thing, Eleanor?" I wasn't so sure. The look of betrayal in Daniel's eyes haunted me. Had I become as calculating and cold as they were? Before I could dwell on it further, the office door opened. Daniel and Clara returned, faces grim but resigned. "We'll accept your offer," Daniel said stiffly, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "But I hope you realize what this means for our relationship." He met my gaze, a cold, hard challenge in his eyes. I met his steadily. "I do. And I hope someday you'll realize what it meant when you put my suitcases on the sidewalk." The words hung in the air between us, a stark, bitter truth. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It was the unraveling of a lifetime, leaving a void where love used to be. How do you truly begin to mend what feels so utterly, irrevocably broken? The first night back in my house, I couldn't sleep. I wandered from room to room, a ghost in my own memories. My hand traced the familiar contours of the walls, felt the cool plaster. I paused at the doorframe in the hallway, my fingers brushing the faint pencil marks where Arthur and I had measured Daniel's height each year, watching him stretch towards adulthood, towards a future that now felt so tragically distant. I stood in the kitchen, its modern, impersonal surfaces stark under the soft glow of the under-cabinet lighting. This was the kitchen where Arthur and I had danced on our 30th anniversary, a spontaneous, joyful spin amidst the scent of freshly baked apple pie. It had been 3 months since the confrontation in Paul's office. 3 months of legal paperwork, of tense, sterile exchanges with Daniel and Clara as they reluctantly moved out, of rebuilding my life piece by painstaking piece. The house felt both familiar and strangely alien. Clara had repainted several rooms in trendy greys and stark whites, erasing the warm yellows and blues Arthur and I had chosen. The kitchen, once the heart of our home, had been remodeled with sleek, impersonal appliances, all stainless steel and sharp angles. But underneath the cosmetic changes, the true bones of the home remained. The familiar squeak of the third step on the staircase, the way the late afternoon sunlight still filtered through the bay window in the living room, the slight, endearing tilt to the floor in the upstairs hallway that Arthur could never quite fix. These were the true memories, etched into the very structure of the place. I walked into the master bedroom, now empty of furniture except for the bed I'd brought from Beatrice's spare room. This room, where Arthur and I had shared our lives, where he had taken his last breath, felt sacred somehow. "I'm home," I whispered, the words hanging in the quiet air as if he might hear me. The silence that answered wasn't lonely, just peaceful. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I belonged. The doorbell rang the next morning as I was unpacking my modest collection of dishes, each one a small triumph. I opened it to find Beatrice, holding a steaming pot of soup and a bottle of wine. "Housewarming," she announced, marching past me into the kitchen, a force of nature. Though I suppose it's technically a homecoming. I laughed, a full, unburdened sound following her. "It feels like both, honestly." Beatrice set her offerings on the counter and turned, surveying the kitchen with a disapproving frown. "Good Lord, what did that woman do to your beautiful oak cabinets?" "Painted them grey and replaced all the handles with something called brushed nickel," I said, a wry smile touching my lips. "Apparently oak is passé." Beatrice snorted. "You know what's passé? Throwing your mother-in-law out on the street?" We both laughed, though the hurt beneath the humour was still raw. "Have you heard from them?" Beatrice asked, as she helped me unpack, her movements efficient and comforting. I shook my head. "Not since the closing. Daniel made it clear that I'd chosen the house over them." "That's not what happened, and you know it," Beatrice said firmly, her eyes sharp. "You chose self-respect. There's a difference." I wasn't sure Daniel would ever see it that way, but I had made peace with my decision. The alternative, continuing to let them use me while treating me like an afterthought, was no longer acceptable. "Well," Beatrice said, opening the wine with a decisive pop, "to new beginnings." We clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude for this woman who had stood by me when my own family hadn't. The following weeks brought a steady rhythm to my days. Mornings at Rosie's Cafe, my feet aching but my spirits soaring. Afternoons spent slowly restoring the house to something that felt like mine again. I didn't have the money to replace all of Clara's modern updates, but I could add touches that brought back the warmth. Colourful throw pillows. Arthur's worn armchair returned to its place by the bay window. Family photos proudly returned to the mantel. Arthur's old fishing gear, once dismissed as clutter, now hung proudly in the den, a defiant symbol of what couldn't be erased. One Saturday morning, I was planting tulip bulbs in the front garden when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. My heart jumped to my throat as Daniel stepped out, looking uncertain. He stood awkwardly at the edge of the garden, hands shoved into his pockets. "The flowers look nice," he offered, his voice hesitant. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "Dad always loved tulips," he continued, glancing around the yard. "I remember him planting them every fall." I brushed dirt from my hands. "What brings you here, Daniel?" He shifted uncomfortably. We didn't get the house in Oakwood Hills." I wasn't surprised. Their credit had likely been too damaged by the missed mortgage payments. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it, despite everything. Daniel looked down at his shoes. expensive loafers now gathering dust from the garden path. We found an apartment instead. It's small, but it's teaching us some perspective, I guess. I waited, sensing there was more. "Clara's pregnant again," he said finally, the words almost a whisper. "The baby's due in January?" "Congratulations," I said softly, wondering if this news was meant to hurt me, to remind me of what I'd be missing. Daniel met my eyes for the first time. "Lily asks about you. She doesn't understand why we don't visit Grandma anymore." A pain, sharp and sweet, lanced through my heart. I missed my granddaughter fiercely. "She's welcome here any time," I said. Then, after a pause, "So are you?" Daniel nodded, then hesitated. "Mum, I've been thinking about everything, about what happened." I held my breath, not daring to hope for real understanding. "I'm not saying we handled things well," he continued, choosing his words carefully. "But you chose a house over your family. I don't know if I can forgive that." My momentary hope deflated. He still didn't see it. "I didn't choose a house, Daniel," I said quietly, my voice filled with a calm conviction. "I chose not to be erased. There's a difference." He frowned, clearly not agreeing. "Anyway, I thought you should know about the baby, and maybe Lily and Leo could visit sometimes, if that's okay." It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it was a small opening, a tiny crack in the wall between us. "I'd like that," I said. After Daniel left, I sat on the porch swing, processing the encounter. The relationship with my son was damaged, perhaps irreparably. He still couldn't see how deeply he had hurt me, how fundamentally he had betrayed my trust. But he had come today, had reached out, however inadequately. It was a start, not an ending. That evening, Beatrice and Charles came over, along with Rosa from the cafe, and Paul and his wife. We sat in my backyard, the same yard where I'd hosted Daniel's high school graduation party, where Arthur and I had celebrated anniversaries, where life had unfolded in all its messy glory. As twilight settled around us, the conversation flowing easily among these people who had become my chosen family, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. "A toast," Beatrice declared, raising her glass, "to Eleanor Vance, who reminds us all that it's never too late to reclaim your life." Everyone clinked glasses, smiling warmly at me. Later, as the stars emerged in the clear summer sky, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the familiar creaks and sighs of my house. I thought of Arthur, of the life we'd built, of the son we'd raised who had somehow lost his way. I thought of the woman I'd become in these past months, stronger, more determined, unwilling to be diminished for anyone's convenience. The house around me wasn't just walls and a roof. It was a testament to survival, to resilience, to the quiet, unstoppable power of a woman who had finally learned to put herself first. I was home, not just in this house, but in my own life, and for the first time in years, that life stretched before me, full of possibilities that were entirely mine. What unexpected turns have led you to reclaim your own narrative, finding strength where you least expected it?